elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our Constitution, our people, our Parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, Channel 408 on DSTV.
We are humbled by the call for an annual Mandela Day in our honor. Our struggle for freedom and justice was a collective effort. Mandela Day is no different. It is in your hands to create a better world for all who live in it. Mandela Day will not be a holiday, but a day devoted to service. It is our hope that people will dedicate their time and effort to improve the conditions within their own communities. We thank you for participating in Mandela Day.
Absheni sanibonani, good afternoon and welcome to Parliament TV. Li-inalami kitembi Nkosi Ngoma. Today is Mandela Day and this year marks 105 years since the birth of Nelson Mandela and 10 years since his passing in 2013. Mandela Day is celebrated yearly on the 18th of July in honor of the first democratically elected president of South Africa, the late Nelson Mandela. The day was officially declared by the United Nations in 2009 and was first officially celebrated in 2010. This year's Mandela Day theme is Climate, Food and Solidarity. This Mandela Day, we are called to take action against climate change and create food-resilient environments in solidarity with communities across the world and right here at home that are facing crisis due to climate change. Global climate change was not seen as a serious, realistic threat for most South Africans. However, following the heavy rains which have led to the devastating floods which occurred in KwaZulu-Natal province, the North-West province, and some parts of the Eastern Cape province, not to mention the recent tornado in Inanda, KwaZulu-Natal, and snowfall in Johannesburg. The impact of global climate change is no longer a distant future threat, and its impact can no longer be ignored. Added to that, South Africa remains the most unequal country in the world. The socio-economic inequality, in turn, is made obvious through food insecurity. Statistics South Africa reports that almost 23.6% of South Africans in 2020 were affected by moderate to severe food insecurity, while almost 14.9% experienced severe food insecurity. Today, we have invited a panel to have this discussion on the matter of climate change and food security and to explore the steps that South Africa is taking towards finding sustainable solutions to tackle these critical issues. Before I introduce our panel, and in light of Mandela Day being about learning from the values of Nelson Mandela, let us reflect on this clip of former President Mandela delivering his farewell speech to the National Assembly in 1999.
I have noted with deep gratitude the generous praise that has often been given to me as an individual. But let me state this: to the extent that I have been able to achieve anything, I know that this is because I am the product of the people of South Africa. I am the product of the rural masses who inspired in me the pride in our past and the spirit of resistance. I am the product of the workers of South Africa who in the mines, factories, fields and offices of our country have pursued the principle that the interests of each are founded in the common interest of all. I am the product of South Africa's intelligentsia of every color, who have labored to give our society knowledge of itself and to fashion our people's aspirations into a reasonable dream. I am the product of South Africa's business people in industry and agriculture, commerce and finance, whose spirit of enterprise has helped turn our country's immense natural resources into the wealth of our nation. To the extent that I have been able to take our country forward to this new era, it is because I am the product of the people of the world who have cherished the vision of a better life for all people everywhere. I am the product of Africa and her long cherished dream of a rebirth that can now be realized so that all of her children may play in the sun. The long walk continues. Ndlela ntle, mo ilup, tsela tshweu.
Welcome back. You're still watching Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. To help us discuss today's topic, I am now joined by our panel members. In studio, I have with me Dr. Sifiso Ntombela, who's the Chief Economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council. Yes, and the rest of our panels are joining us on the virtual panel. First of which is Mr. Nthibi Modise, a member of Parliament in the National Assembly and the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. Good afternoon, Mr. Modise, and welcome to Parliament TV.
Good afternoon, Tembukosi. Good afternoon to all the guests and the people of South Africa.
We lastly will also welcome Dr. Nthabiseng Mutete, who is a Group Executive for Crop Sciences at the Agricultural Research Council. Good afternoon, Dr. Mutete.
Good afternoon, Tembinkosi. Thank you for the invitation, and good afternoon to the other guests and the people of the Republic.
Thank you very much for all. Thank you very much to all for joining us on Parliament TV. Dr. Ntombela, I think before we get into our topic, we first need to look at the broad definitions of climate change and food security. And in doing so, we need to, if you can just briefly share what are some of the key factors that contribute to food insecurity in South Africa, and how does this compare to global trends?
Yes, no. Thanks once again, Temigos. I think usually, perhaps maybe it's important to also separate between what we usually often say climate change and climate variability, because the two, when you're coming from agriculture, they're almost the same, but they mean something different. So climate change is, of course, it's the change of the weather patterns in a long period of time, could be decades and 10, where you're seeing temperature rises and a general decline in terms of rainfall. Now that means that it impacts our food, our farmers' ability to produce food, because as you know, Food security, it goes to do with agriculture, and agriculture to the large extent, a farmer needs to be able to balance his cost, but also need to balance the weather patterns. Now, we also have what we call weather variability, which is one of the things that I think South Africa at the moment is very battling with it. What we mean by that, you see an intensity of either rainfall coming very heavy where farmers can't even access the fields when they've planted, or you see a very high rise of temperature which could cause what we usually see as heat wave, which can destroy the food. Now, all these things, of course, are the global phenomenon, as we've seen that there's a general rise of temperature and global warming across the world. And South Africa, at least to the benefit of the world, South Africa is one of the signatories of the Paris Agreement, which means South Africa is committed into finding solution to the global warming and the changing of climate. Now, when we think of food security generally, it means the inability of people, it's a security of people to have access into food. Now, food security also have the four components of it. It's the availability, which means people can be able to, food is available either in the shops or in under a distribution system we have. Is then access into it, which is the function of the infrastructure, whether people can be able to access that food that they have. And then the third element of it is, of course, the affordability, because you can have access and availability of food, but people can't afford food. And then the last component, of course, which is the most crucial one, is the nutritional value of that food. Now, when you're looking at South Africa, and generally in Africa as a sense, South Africa is very good in producing food. We have sufficient quantities of food to feed our nation, even our neighbors. We can have access to food. We have a variety of shops where you can have wholesale or retailers. The challenge with our country at this point in time is the affordability of food. So you have a growing number of citizens that are unable to afford food. And to a large extent, it's a link into some of the factors we've seen in the world. We have seen the impact of the Russia-Ukraine, which basically generated elevation of food. Before that, we had disruptions that were caused by the COVID-19 and other elements that often have an impact at a global level, which got a direct impact with the South Africans. So that's one of the big challenges of how do you then make the available food be affordable for the majority, or actually not majority, for all the South Africans. And that, I think, at the moment is one of the areas we're currently battling with.
I'm happy that you mentioned the impact on the farmers' ability to produce food, because we have seen in the recent past the floods, as I've earlier indicated, in KZN and some parts of the Northwest and Eastern Cape. But to talk more on this, Dr. Mutete, if you can just briefly share with us the impact of climate change on food security in South Africa and your assessment of the impact of the intersection between climate change and food security.
Thank you very much for that very important point. Obviously, as the Agricultural Research Council, our mandate is to conduct agricultural research, develop technologies, and disseminate these technologies for the benefits of the farmers. And of course, our areas of focus include climate change as a cross-cutting research area that is important to all areas of research in the ARC. And as a result, the intersection between food security and climate change is an important area of interest, concern, and priority in terms of the technologies that we develop, including how we transfer these technologies to farmers, how we disseminate these technologies. It is important, therefore, to take into consideration all of the constraints on resource availability that climate change is imposing on food production, and then address this by developing appropriate technologies, disseminating them to farmers on a timely basis, and continuing to raise awareness and availing information to farmers to enable farmers to plan better in their production enterprises across the value chain, and ensuring preparedness for farmers. So the ARC provides all of these services to farmers to enable farmers to prepare better, to enable farmers to make better choices on production each season and in the long term. These are some of the services that we provide, and all our scientific staff, the researchers, are seized with new approaches to try and minimize, mitigate, and adapt production systems to the new reality of climate change that we need to deal with. This is how we provide our support to the sector and to ensure that we continue to be competitive as the agriculture sector and as a country. And we collaborate quite widely also with other countries in the world, with our commodity organizations and other research organizations in South Africa.
And having conducted this agricultural research on food security, what were some of the critical findings of this research in relation to the climate change?
Obviously, we have demonstrated that as these long-term changes continue to unfold, it is anticipated there will be a shift in production areas. Some of the areas that we knew to be very good areas for, say, production of staple foods will be shifting, particularly from the west to the east, as climate continues to be wetter towards the eastern parts of the country. The ARC has done these studies and has disseminated this information. But it's also important to consider the diversification of particularly our key staples for the benefit of food security. And so we are bringing in the diversification element, particularly by bringing nutritious food. We are also researching on ensuring that at least the changing in the length of season can be, accommodated by farmers by availability of crops that can reach maturity within a shorter season, and so that farmers are able to make a good harvest in the shortest periods that they're able to do their production. And we also are working on disease and pest resistance. We also, and this is not just in crop-based agriculture. As I've said, climate change is a cross-cutting research theme in the ARC. So even our colleagues who are responsible for advising and developing technologies on livestock production in the country are equally seized with the same level of technological advancement, development, and advisory to farmers to respond, to ensure that the country responds appropriately to the threat of climate change, to food security.
Thanks, Dr. Mutete. Very insightful points that you've raised there. But we need to, now coming to you, Tata Madiba, if you can just share what has been the role of Parliament in responding to this crisis of global climate change. We know that last year Parliament, the bill was introduced, the climate change bill was introduced. You can perhaps, in addition to what I've just asked, if you can just share some of the objectives of the bill and how far is that process now?
No, happy Mandela Day to you and to the guests. Happy Mandela Day to the people of South Africa. I'm very happy that we're having this conversation on this day at which one of the proponents, other than Desmond Tutu, the proponents of climate change, were born. Look, we have been busy with the climate change bill as a portfolio committee of the National Assembly. We have crisscrossed all the provinces of the country. The bill seeks to enable the development of an effective climate change response and a long-term just transition to low carbon and climate resilient economy. That is what the bill seeks to achieve. The bill is new. We're not repealing or repealing any existing act. It has never happened. We are the first portfolio committee to introduce this bill. It was introduced to us in 2021, and then we immediately in 2022 started visiting provinces. On Sunday, we were concluding in the Western Cape, in Khayelitsha. We have literally reached every other part of the province. And I'm happy to report that the response that we have received from the people of South Africa is quite overwhelming. I can assure you that almost every other South African is taking keen interest and they are participating intrinsically. They are involved in this, in the establishment of this bill. At this point, we will just meet as a committee, take it to the National Council of Provinces. From there, it will go to the president for assent, and then it becomes a law of the land.
You spoke about a response which has been overwhelming from South Africans. So what were some of the critical issues that were raised during the public hearings?
They range from a quite number of elements. Look, there are people who argue that the bill is not specific in terms of the sanctions and penalties of the major contributors to global emission and the people who are in the main using fossil fuels, coal, oil, etc. They recommend that the bill should be specific on what are the sanctions and offenses that will be imposed upon those people. But in some areas, there are community members who are raising the issues that the bill does not speak to the role that can be played by traditional leaders and traditional healers. It only speaks about the role of metropolitan municipalities, mayors, the MECs, and the minister. So there is a strong recommendation that we must also be clear on what is the role of the House of Traditional Leaders, but what is it that this bill will assist in terms of the triple challenges that affect our people in the main, which is poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So there's quite a lot that has been raised, but as a portfolio committee, from our conviction, we had to clarify that all of these will have to be encapsulated and will be refined at the time when we meet as a portfolio committee before we send the bill to the National Council of Provinces.
Are you likely to conclude the National Assembly process before the end of the current parliamentary term?
To be honest with you, it is done. From our side, we are done. We are only going to meet in 2 weeks or so. Like I said, we only came back from the Western Cape on Sunday. So we are giving the administration and the department an opportunity to consolidate the report and bring together everything else that we have found from the people of South Africa. We go and meet as a committee and discuss. So on our side, it is done from the National Assembly point of view. It will then go to the National Council of Provinces. Our view is that they should be done by November. So by the time this term ends, this bill should be a law.
And thank you for that. To those who are watching, you are watching Nelson Mandela Day, a panel discussion live on channel 408 DSTV. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, as part of the work which they are doing in creating awareness around climate, food and solidarity, have focused on promoting community and backyard gardens, supporting fruit and indigenous tree planting. Let's talk a bit about the impact of climate change on land reform and rural communities. Dr. Ndombele, if I can come to you. Firstly, how much land does one need to be able to produce food? Because it's safe to say that people should be producing food, but we also cannot ignore the fact that you need to have appropriate land for you to be able to produce food.
That is correct. And I think to even add on that, Temgosi, you will recognize that we come in the country that inequality on land is still an issue that we are trying to address through land reform as the government. But to answer your question directly, it all depends on what type of product you produce and what's the technology you are using. Dr. Matete just spoke earlier on about the work they do on research to improve the productivity. Now, we are the country that is very innovative in terms of food production. You find nowadays, especially the up young and farmers, they are even farming in the malls, which you call the roof farming, which basically the square meter that you can produce on that. That being the case, it does not shift away the focus that when you're looking at a vast majority of land where you can produce staple food such as maize and wheat, you need a substantial amount of hectares that can range from anything from 1,500 hectares to larger, depending where you are in part of the country as well, because the climate and the weather and the soil type across the country, they vary. Now, you are speaking also around the issues of the land reform, as well as in partly part of the areas which also talks into the traditional areas. The Honorable Modisa was speaking in terms of also the role that the traditional leaders must play in all this. One of the key things we have seen with the climate change challenges is that it tends to erode the productivity of the land. So you find out the land reform has pushed the land to be transferred and try to, as part of restoring the dignity of those that were taken forcefully from land, but also bringing the new farmers that wants to produce, because land reform has different pillars in it. And what you see with climate change is that because the productivity of that land tend to reduce over time, you find out that now a specific farmer will require a bigger or a larger part of land than would have been in the case, which tends to impact the pace of people that are coming in to produce and actively contribute in the farming space. But also secondly, what it does with that is that then now the type of farmer support that needs to be provided for, if you're now linking land reform and climate change with food production, you require a much larger farmer support per farmer, which tends to not fit in within the limited resources that the government of today works with in driving food security. So that's part and parcel of some of the challenges, which are even more exacerbated in areas such as in our traditional areas, because those are the areas in our tribal land where we know about 13% of our land is still sitting with some of those, or in the former homelands. Most of that land is under our traditional leaders' administration. And the challenge there is that then when we're linking it again to the farmer support programs, is that they are struggling with the infrastructure, like irrigation systems is not in good space, the roads are not in good space, but also the type of soil that they have requires a much more significant improvement, which is linking into the system that our sister organization, ARC, tends to provide that support into those. So this is a suite of challenges that are really battling in terms of linking this nexus between climate change, food security. I will even throw in the issues of energy as we drive energy. The Honorable was talking about also the need of transiting into the low carbon economy. So that's a nexus we often speak about in terms of this context of driving that. And it's one of the challenges that we're having. But because I will be doing injustice without recognizing the good innovative systems and solutions that are driven not only just by government, but by our private sector industries. We know a lot of other research is driven by our industries, where they are looking at innovations and looking also some of the opportunities that comes with changing climate. Give you an example as I close on this point. The Western Cape is generally a good wheat production region. As we know, wheat, we use it for our flour and the bread. Now, with changing climate, it makes some of other regions that were traditionally not suitable to produce wheat, like in the Eastern Cape and northern part of the country, now start to be suitable. And of course, we get to be informed by that, by the research that is driven by Dr. Matete in the ARC and her colleagues, where we look at then what cultivars can be suitable for those areas.
Thank you, Dr. Ndombela. So, Dr. Mutiti, as a sister organization and as a research council, what are then some of the strategies that need to be explored to integrate climate consideration into land reform policies to ensure sustainable land use?
Thank you once again, Tambingosi, for that question. And yes, I would advocate very strongly for climate smart agriculture. And in climate smart agriculture, we have, integrated land use planning as a very key intervention. And land reform is an important aspect of our land use planning in the Republic. And therefore, it's important that as we deliver on this mandate of land reform in the country, we also need to bring in technologies that will make farmers who get allocated this land to become productive. And those technologies, obviously, or approaches actually, include climate smart agriculture. In this regard, I think then we can employ even, enrichment practices in our production to make some of this what would seem to be marginal land or land whose quality is deteriorating as a result of climate change to improve through processes of minimum soil disturbance, no tillage, but also the importance of building, and increasing soil carbon content in the land that the farmers get to work on, particularly the land reform farmers. Obviously, this is going to come at a cost, and it is going to require an investment, obviously. And other interventions that we bring forth as the ARC, obviously, is looking at new cropping areas, like Dr. Ntombela has said, the production of wheat in the Eastern Cape. We have areas like Matatiele that are actually with very good soils, where we are now working with farmers on the production of wheat. And so broadening or the range of areas into these microclimates that are now being created by this change that we're finding ourselves dealing with. And so climate smart agriculture is a very important element of securing productive agricultural activities for all farmers. And we advocate it very strongly, and those farmers that have adopted it, even through the commodity associations, we have been able to demonstrate together as a collective that it is a very timely intervention. We encourage farmers to embrace it, and it will bring other benefits, perhaps new benefits, such as participating also in the carbon markets for their production land. And so it's an area that we continue to work on. It's an area that we continue to innovate around, and we invite more farmers to embrace it.
Great. Hopefully the farmers would definitely be embracing it. And it goes without saying that in addressing climate change, we need more commitment to growing the agricultural economy. Now to talk about sustainable agriculture, if I can come to you, Mr. Modise, if you can just, having been into those hearings, I'm just thinking out that there would have been farmers as years years of public hearings so what were some of the current challenges in the agricultural sector, and what are the opportunities for growth that are there?
Look, I must confess that there are those of us who were subjected to serious lectures there from an agricultural point of view. Over and above these public hearings that we crisscrossed across and interfaced with across the country, we have also invited the Agricultural Research Council. They've also put their perspective on how do they think the growth of agriculture will be affected by climate change. To a larger extent, we learned that global sea levels are rising as a result of human-caused global warming. The rising sea levels cause hurricanes. They damage infrastructure, they damage livelihoods, and livelihoods will be lost. So the solution in that regard is to reduce carbon emissions and the greenhouse gases. So sea levels in general, they are very destructive because they distract the erosion, the wetland, flooding. We lose habitat, fish, birds, and the plants. In the main, those are agricultural areas. So, and these floods, they damage infrastructure, transport, communication, education, and health. So all of this cannot be looked at from a one-side point of view. So it must be looked at holistically. But in general, there's an agreement that climate change is human-made. So the sooner we get our people to get a better understanding of climate change, its effect and its impact, only then we'll be able to reduce the emissions, reduce the burning of fossil fuels, which are coal, which are oil and gases. And there is also a myth that we want to do away immediately with coal. People of Mpumalanga were fighting that we want to do away with what brings the economic stability into their town. So we had to clarify, that's just a myth. That is why we are saying this is a process. We are moving towards a just transition. So doing away with coal in the immediate, we know that it has implications of significantly contributing to unemployment and increasing poverty, etc. So those are some of the lessons that we have learned through this process. We also learned that during the day, the sun shines, and during the night, the earth surface is cool, and it releases the heat back to the atmosphere. And these greenhouse gases, they get trapped. They trap the heat in the atmosphere, and that causes a global warming.
And we learn every day in relation to this global warming topic. Now, just Dr. Mutete, there's some some challenges there that have been raised by Mr. Modise. So as the Agricultural Research Council, what are some of the innovative and sustainable agricultural practices we currently have or are out there which can help us to be more food secure?
Thank you very much, Tambikosi, once again. So we know that with climate change, we're going to have quite a number of resource constraints. We have earlier spoken about the energy challenges and the impact of the energy crisis and how it affects farmers and their enterprises. So I think that has been covered, but from what has been also learned during the public hearings on this climate change bill, I think it's important to also really promote renewable energy. It's an important way forward, and we have to bring efficiency to our energy mix as a country. We've got to have opportunities, embrace opportunities that will enable us to mitigate the current energy challenge that we face so that it doesn't affect production. It's important, and every possible regulatory mechanism that will give us a positive outcome we need to embrace it as a nation, as we look up to Parliament for that leadership and guidance. And also, I think it's important to look at water use resource efficiency, what in all areas of life in the country, not just in the agricultural sector, even though we appreciate the fact that agriculture is the highest user of water in the country, but there are certain efficiency gains that are being brought, including obviously through our breeding programs, where we have been working on a very long time through numerous partnerships to release cultivars that are drought resistant, heat resistant as well, and with some resistance to certain diseases as well. It's very important for us to do so. That's how we try to make agriculture more sustainable in this new future or new reality or new normal of constrained resources. And we note the importance that you're placing on solidarity. We work in a very strong partnership arrangement as the Agricultural Research Council. We work with universities, and I need to emphasize here the role that our CEO, Dr. Lita Maginga, has been placing on partnerships every time he speaks to us, every time he speaks to our stakeholders. He's leading the ARC into new ways of working, new ways of partnerships to mobilize sufficient resources for us to be able to generate the technologies that can contribute to responses that are adequate to climate change, at least in the agriculture sector. So resource use efficiency is important, partnerships are important, and that speaks to solidarity. And also, it's very important to embrace new technologies, and the technologies all in agriculture. So precision agriculture is a very important way of farming as well, because it brings that efficiency gains that are required. And also, as we have said, our breeding, we seek to generate new efficiency gains, even with our breeding programs across all crops, both the staples, the grains, in our horticulture production. Even our colleagues in livestock have very good testimonies of the new technologies that are bringing in efficiency. Colleagues will tell you that there are specific breeds of animals that actually generate more resilience for farmers, like our Nguni breed for cattle, even with low stock as well. So all of these are important. Even in our poultry sector, there are chickens that the colleagues have provided very good guidance and advisory in terms of the research outputs that they have generated with goats as well, the Bura goat. So it's important that we embrace this recommended resilience interventions and opportunities in the agriculture sector, because that is what is going to make us more sustainable. And we have spoken about climate smart agriculture earlier. And we also get a lot of guidance. I must support our Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development that we collaborate with, and also a lot of support from our own portfolio committee of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. Our leaders there, they continue to guide us in the right direction, and they hold us accountable to be able to provide these solutions to the country. So we thank you that you've given us this opportunity to share with you some of the things that we do, and we hope that we continue to be of service to the people of the Republic in the agriculture sector as large as the Agricultural Research Council.
And Mr. Dr. Ndombela, a number of issues were raised by Dr. Mutete, but sometimes we all know that sometimes development conflicts with conservation, especially in the issue of agricultural technology. So how do we address then the conflicts and the increase the synergies between conservation and rural development?
Yes. No, I think you've touched the nail. I was hoping you'll reserve that question for the honorable that is on the platform. But you're absolutely correct, because these are completing interest. And I think in agriculture, while at times you find that there might be a conflict between driving rural development, which is basically at times can increase into the greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, you want to also preserve the nature. Equally so, agriculture is one of the solutions to climate change, because agricultural crops by design in terms of being a biological asset, it means it can contribute into the carbon sequestration into the climate. So it can be able to even take some of the greenhouse gas emissions that are sitting in our atmosphere. So that's one of the things. And I think to give you a sense as well, what we are seeing, for example, if you go around in the Western Cape or part of the Northern Cape, you find that the farmers have actually been able to measure how much the crops and the fruits that they produce basically emit some of the carbon emissions. And they've actually put back some of the system that can be able to preserve the soil and be able to produce those crops in a climate-friendly, which was Dr. Mateta was talking about, the climate-smart agriculture. So I think those conflicts are basically around to say, how do you adopt these solutions that actually help to achieve the board? And we've seen it in some of the experimented solutions, that you can still drive rural development, you can still enhance food production and food security, while at the same time you're conserving the environment and you're reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from the agriculture sector. And we have solutions that we have illustrated across the different commodities and across provinces. And it's a matter of now, how do you upscale that? And equally, when you upscale it, you also preserve the indigenous knowledge, because that's another area that we have to emphasize, that in some communities, they already have decades and centuries of indigenous knowledge that have preserved the climate, that has preserved the soil that we have. And how do we then uproot and harvest that indigenous knowledge into the technologies that can then be forming a synergies that will help us to reach a green economy, at the same time ensuring that food security becomes a reality in the country.
And to the viewers at home, you're still watching the live broadcast of Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. And we are talking Nelson Mandela Day and climate change. And part of the theme speaks to solidarity with communities across the world and right here at home that are facing crisis due to climate change. Now I want to discuss how we can do that and also ensure inclusivity in climate action. But if we can then just hear from you, Mr. Modise, because you've had the doctor in studio with me, has raised a number of issues that he felt should be responded to by you. But we can just briefly speak to us about some of the ways we can use in fostering collaboration between government, civil society, and private sector in climate initiative and food security initiatives.
Well, I'm not too sure Dr. Ntombela wants me to speak as a civilian, or he wants me to speak as a member of parliament. Unfortunately, I cannot speak on behalf of government, but I hold a view that it is extremely important that we need to come together, society in its entirety. Food security, job preservations, and sharing cannot be the responsibility of one particular sector within our country. So we should never, under any circumstance, want to attribute that responsibility to a single individual. In my view, it goes the same way with climate change. The same way that we're thinking that, for example, there are people that we have met whom we can easily categorize as climate denialists. But those who are affected by the floods in KwaZulu-Natal, those who are affected by the heat wave in the Northern Cape, where about 6 people passed on in Kakamas. And those who realize the rising sea levels, those who see the tornadoes, those who see the rains that are falling when we're expecting it to be extremely cold because it's winter. You'd understand that those are the effects of climate change. Now, everybody needs to come on board in terms of finding a solution to that. The same goes with food security. I think it's Memotiti who spoke about solidarity. The Research Council and should foster partnerships with government and of course the civil sector and the private sector, because more often than not, we leave the private sector out of the ball. They need to come on board in terms of assisting food preservation, because in my view, food preservation can lead to job security. So that is how far we can go. But we don't have much to do as Parliament. Our job is to make laws. We consult you a bit, you agree with us, we make laws, they are binding on you. We move.
Yeah, thanks for that. Now, Dr. Mutiti, as the Agricultural Research Council, so what are some of the practical ways to ensure climate policies and actions are inclusive and considerate of marginalized communities?
Thank you very much. So I think at a global level, we understand that there is a binding principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, understanding that there are certain things that the developed nations can do to support developing nations to ensure that they are able to report on climate change and adapt to climate change, and also respond appropriately by making certain resources available in a collaborative manner. And ourselves as the Agricultural Research Council, we practicalize this principle of common but differentiated responsibilities in response to climate change by the type of partnerships that we enter into with our international partners across, a number of global regions, including on the continent as well as here in the SADC region, but also our partnerships locally in South Africa, including partnerships with universities, the research consortia that we find ourselves participating in. As I've said, the issue of partnerships is very important for us, and it's led from the forefront by our CEO. We also have a program called Impact and Partnerships, led by one of our colleagues who's in the executive team. And so we don't only emphasize the impact of our research outputs and outcomes, but we also understand that we cannot achieve it alone. We need to do it with partners. So we have a diverse number of partners. And I think when we go into the ARC's partnership strategy, the last count that I had, we had about 600 partners globally that we work with to deliver a number of these technology development, dissemination, and transfer research activities that we find ourselves in. But importantly, our important partners are farmers. So we conduct a number of farmer field days to where we can also demonstrate these technologies to farmers on their fields, but we also have training services that we offer to farmers and those who are wanting to be agri-entrepreneurs across the value chain. We partner much more strongly with commodity associations and as the leaders of industry, but also with the National Agricultural Marketing Council, where Dr. Ndombela works. So importantly, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention a very important policy intervention such as the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan that we hope can be embraced and as I think an important instrument, at least to create this solidarity across the agriculture mandate here in the Republic with very important benefits, not just locally but internationally. But we're also very excited about opportunities such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, because it is now from an economic perspective elevating key opportunities in agriculture. And we believe that our research and development and innovation interventions are actually reducing the barriers to entry for those who desire to enter the agriculture sector, particularly for women, for youth. We hope we're making it attractive enough, because much as others would say agriculture is an emitter of greenhouse emissions, there are also certain solutions that we can provide to adaptation, including the reduction in the emissions. So we are an important a solution provider to the challenge of climate change that everyone is facing. And we believe that our contribution is significant. It is important as we continue to build capacity of future researchers in agriculture through our training programs, including the postgraduate development program, that others can partner with us in the skills development programs in this particular sector and all the related sector in this broad collaboration environment that we operate in, that we all can make these resources available. And yes, our Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, including Department of Science and Innovation, are important collaborators, and they enable quite a number of these partnerships that we find ourselves operating within. Yes, thanks for now.
Indeed, great programs there by the Agricultural Research Council. In the interest of time, Dr. Ntombela, just to sum up our conversation, I would just like you to share with us, with our viewers, on what are some of the immediate action that we as citizens can take, or what considerations do we need to make to address our collective carbon footprint. And that you can just add also your closing remarks, because I'm going to be asking the two panelists who are on the virtual platform after we spoke for their closing remarks as well. If you can just be brief. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No, I think in the last 3 years, as the South Africans that are active in the agriculture and the food space, we have embarked in a very rigorous process between government, industry, civil society, and labor in trying to find out what are the priorities that we need to drive going forward. And those priorities, without going into length, are captured in what we call now an agriculture and agro-processing master plan. And we've actually endorsed and signed it here.
I'm actually still going to invite you for a conversation on that plan.
Most certainly. And in that plan, it's very succinct in what needs to be done. And the key to that, we're promoting active citizenship, with communities working with government, working with the private sector, as well as labor, and ensuring that we create also not only just employment in the agriculture sector, but we create decent employment conditions that are safe for our farmers and farm workers. And it's all contained in that master plan. So what I would say, really in close-up, I would say I encourage every South African citizen that is looking right now and have interest in seeing a sustainable agricultural sector that is driving food security and ensuring that we preserve our environment for our current generation and our future generation, that get involved in some of those areas, because in some of those structures that we have, some of them we have established, some of them we're going to be establishing, we're working with other provinces. We get involved, and you will be able to see how you can make this South African be better for all of us, as we want to make it a better country.
Mr. Modise, your closing remarks quickly.
No, thank you very much for having us, Tebikosi. Thank you very much. Great discussions with the panelists. I also wish all South Africans a happy Mandela Day. We can only win if we are intrinsically involved in dismantling poverty and creating resilient food security. By planting a simple fruit tree, we are contributing to the reduction of climate change. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Mutete, your parting shot?
Thank you very much, Shabikosi, for inviting the Agricultural Research Council to this very important conversation. We are open to more conversations with the people of the Republic in this area of climate, food, and solidarity, as it is the call to action for the 2023 International or Nelson Mandela International Day. We are, as the ARC, very well poised, we believe, to contributing to the dismantling of poverty and inequality by taking action against climate change and creating resilient food environments. And I think in closing, let me also thank the council, the board of the Agricultural Research Council, for their leadership as they continue to be the greatest champions of the things that they encourage us to do in accordance with our mandate. And we thank you for the opportunity to participate. We are a partner with everyone, and the ARC is open for business. I encourage people to visit our website, to visit, I think there is an ARC in every province in the Republic. If not a fully funded, full center, there are research stations as well. And we work very closely with provincial departments of agriculture. These are important partners that we need to acknowledge as well. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you to our panelists for joining us this Mandela Day to discuss solidarity to reduce climate change and increase food security. Our panelists were Honorable Ntibi Modise, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. We are joined by Dr. Ntabiseng Mutete, Group Executive for Crop Sciences at the Agricultural Research Council, and Dr. Sifiso Ntombela, the Chief Economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council. Thank you for watching Parliament TV. From me, Umfana Wagutsolo, Thembi Nkosi Ngoma. I wish you a happy Mandela Day. Goodbye.